first topic is it's essentially about the who many are aware and perhaps have a strong feeling of is Jim Semivan. Jim Semivan, who was on Coast to Coast last night. And you know what? Because of everything I want to report, I want to just read a quick little blurb about who he is, just really quickly, okay?
Yeah,
so
I think
Jim
that's
retired.
okay.
So Jim Semivan retired in 2007 after a 25-year career in the Central Intelligence Agency's clandestine services. Okay. At the time of his retirement, he was a member of the CIA's Senior Intelligence Service. Jim served multiple overseas and domestic tours along with senior management positions in the CIA and headquarters. He is a recipient of the agency's Career Intelligence Medal. He also, which isn't covered here, is he also went back at one point and joined the Science and Technology Division as opposed to the clandestine services, and did work in that unit as well. And so this is a man with a tremendous history. He's a real a real diamond to the country. I mean, these are the kind of Americans we want to see in these intelligence roles and so forth. And so this is a man that has set some credibility and so forth. Now, true, he's got some history in this world, so some people may not have a huge following for him anymore. But the point is a very professional, very methodical, very intelligent individual. And last night he was on Coast to Coast. Now, Dave, you help me with this. Am I correct to say that a good night on Coast to Coast, they might reach 10 million ears?
Yeah, about there.
About there, give or take. Okay, cool. Okay, so roughly 10 million people, right, heard from this, 25-year CIA veteran that in the past, him and his wife had a abduction event. Now, to his mind, he wasn't abducted. He uses that term because he's been told it is a classic abduction scenario. In his memory, it all happened inside the bedroom of his house. His wife was present. It was not pleasant. Coincidentally, or not coincidentally, to me, humorlessly, it was not that upsetting when it happened. It became very upsetting over time because of the way everyone else reacted to it, and because of the things he found out afterwards. But my point is that here you have a decorated, veteran of our intelligence services getting on the radio and saying to 10 million people that perhaps not abductions, but at minimal experiences, if I can say that more poorly, are something that is actually happening to Americans. And that, to me, is a watershed moment. I mean, I was blown away that Jim said this.
I think this was groundbreaking radio. I had known about Jim Semivan being taken for a couple of years. Melinda Leslie had been public with his experience, but we hadn't heard from the man at all. We do know his relationship with George Knapp, of course, going back to the Skinwalker Ranch days and the ties to Robert Bigelow. But I mean, the fact that now we have him coming out publicly and admitting that he is an experiencer. I mean, does this now change the game, John? Because phase 3, I've always been told that this is going to be in 3 phases. Number 1 was to announce the phenomena is there. That's what the New York Times article did, along with the 3 videos. That's where we heard about it could be Russia, it could be China. Phase 2, they phased out Russia and China and started talking about this is from somewhere else. We're not sure where this is coming from, maybe in space. And that's when all of a sudden earlier or late last year, we heard Bill Nelson from NASA, and people speaking at the Pentagon, all of a sudden talking about space, UFOs, and extraterrestrials. And now all of a sudden, out of the blue, Jim Semivan decides to start talking about his alien abduction.
I know.
And
Sorry,
it
no,
just,
please continue.
no, it just, I find the timing awesome, but very weird as well.
Oh no. Well, okay. Well, go ahead and finish with your thought. I'll tell you what I'm thinking.
Hmm.
No.
Please go ahead.
So my argument would be that this is anything but coincidental. Look, they've been trying to get Jim Semivan on Coast to Coast for years upon years upon years, and this is the very first time. This now, while we're in this quiet period and all this stuff's going on, this is the one time that Jim Semivan decides to get on Coast to Coast only with George Knapp and dump this, as well as hint at a bunch of other stuff, right? Because one of there are other things that he touched on, which I wasn't planning on covering, but I'll cover this one thing in particular, is that one of the reasons why he hasn't come into a determination yet for what he thinks happened to him and his wife is because he's still being studied. And he is currently in an active study where him and his wife are being looked at. And he talked about teams coming to his house and drawing blood and doing other tests. So this is an active investigation, which is another kind of surprising point for one, that it's happening, but two, that he's being so public about it, right? And the thing is that for our community, this does almost nothing, because everyone already has decided how they feel about Jim Semivan or not, right? And so if you like him, okay, and if you don't, okay, whatever. But for the rest of the world and for the rest of America, for all the normal people, this is a CIA veteran that is getting up and talking about an interaction with a non, earthly being of some sort, in the same way that you would normally hear him talking about terrorism, right? That's a fundamental change. Now how long will it take that echo to reach anywhere? Who knows? But to me, historians will look back at this as an important moment.
Well, let me tell you something that I know, John, just from being an experiencer myself. If this was a one and done scenario, there would be no need to do or continue an investigation. What that statement that you repeated of Jim Semivan stating that he and his wife are still being investigated tells me, as an experiencer, that they are still having experiences.
And I can't say that I'm surprised to hear you say that, but I appreciate you doing so. I wouldn't have picked up on that myself, and to me that sounds like it might have some accuracy to it. So yeah, so pensively, I would tend to agree with you without data.
I want to ask you another question about this, John, because this is a very important topic here. All right. Is this potentially related to the Stars Academy? And let me follow up with that for a second, because Jim Semivan is one of the co-founders with Tom DeLonge on the TTSA. The TTSA has not recovered at all from the loss of Steve Justice, Chris Mellon, and of course Luis Elizondo when they departed just over a year ago. Could this be the start of some sort of resurrection of the Stars Academy by Jim Semivan now stepping up and saying, "This has happened to me," publicly?
Okay. Okay. So first off, yeah. So there was a portion of this 2-hour segment that was dedicated to a TTSA update, and that was going to be my second item, and so we can get into that in a second. And Jim does talk about that. So there's probably some accuracy to what you said, that there's some tie-in to what's going on at TTSA and what Jim's doing. However, what he talked about going on at TTSA doesn't seem like it was an immediately recent happening. So I don't know if that would have had any relationship to the triggering of it, but I understand what you're saying. But yeah, there's definitely some challenge there. But would you like to get into what he said?
Sure.
Okay. Well, I just didn't know if you wanted to continue on with it, but we can bounce around. I'm all good.
Well, we'll bounce
So
into it.
So basically, on the panel that you had on Friday, I missed the very beginning of it, but the context of the conversation, as I understood it, was that you guys were debating, were essentially discussing the end of TTSA. And so then you get Jim Semivan getting on Coast to Coast, Friday night, and saying that that TTSA is by no means gone, and that they have simply changed the name of the company to the Stars Inc. They've decided to suspend all science and research related activities, as we'd heard before, with the exception of the CREDA, which will continue to go forward. And they have, I forget what the numbers they had, but they had multiple movies and multiple TV projects currently in progress. And essentially the focus is going to be on media for now, until they can raise enough money that they can look into other things again. But from the way it sounded, Jim Semivan is still fully invested. The company moves forward as a media investment, and to me, it's kind of a logical phase for TTSA to go through. But to your earlier point, we don't know what the specific topics are of the media platforms that TTSA is working on, and I would not be at all surprised if it turns out that one of them ends up tying in really nicely to Jim's personal story.
Well, that would make sense because TTSA, or the To the Stars Inc., whatever they're known as now, does need a facelift. They do. It's more than just a name change. They have investors that they still have to answer to. And when you have those type of investors, there are probably people saying, "What's happening with my money?" Some, they may not worry about it. Others are going to be very, very upset because they watch every penny they spend. And this is where I can see where we could, see a rebranding of the To the Stars Inc. Jon, welcome back. And right before the break, we were talking about the newest incarnation of the To the Stars Academy, which is now called To the Stars Inc., according to Jim Semivan, who just came out with George Knapp last night, stating his own encounter or encounters with extraterrestrials with him and his wife.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, I mean, his uh, his event is not something that was unheard of. Anyone who's been researching this field for a long time, I'm sure, has at one point or the other run into at least somewhat of a description of what happened. And so we had some idea, but as you said, this is the first time I've ever heard him talk about it personally.
Okay, so the fact that he is one of the founders of the To the Stars Academy, along with Tom DeLonge, and given his illustrious position that he had in some very top secret type groups within the United States government, how is this going to play out for the goals of the future for the To the Stars Academy?
Oh well, I mean, the thing is that you know, um, so what they fail to realize is that the only thing in this universe that's harder to do than disclosure is to produce a company that can produce successful media properties. And that's what it really comes down to. Unfortunately, it all depends on the success of what they produce. If they produce a couple really good movies or a couple really good properties, they get out some real hit content, and now everything changes. But it's going to be all about the reception of their content. That's all that matters. Now, if they take off because of a content hit, then having Jim Semivan aboard is all roses, because all he does is add credibility to their team. and he brings stories, and he brings letters to his name, and he brings affiliations to other groups and so forth. He could not smell better in a situation where TTSA is doing well. However, whether TTSA does well or not, I would argue has less to do with the quality of the content they create, and has more to do with just dumb luck. So I don't really know what their chances are.
Can we
I
still
mean, what
consider
makes a
them?
good movie, right?
Okay, but can we still consider them a player in the UFO world,
Oh
or are
well,
those days done?
look. The whole idea that any of us have ever looked at a company or a group and given personhood to that company, and declared that company or that group to be valuable or not valuable was all of our own issues, and we should have never done it in the first place. What we've always been talking about is what are the individual contributions of the individual members of each of these units, right? And I would argue that right now TTSA still has a team of people that have the potential to be extremely influential. Now, whether they will be or not, that's up to them.
What do they need to change in order to get or save some face in the public eye?
Well, it depends. If their goal is as stated, and that is to shelve science and research for the foreseeable future and just focus on media, then I would argue that they need to disappear, and they need to focus on producing great content, and that's it, and that's all that matters. Their content is all that matters. The quality of the content is all that matters, and that is what will make or break them. And that's it. That's all that matters. There is no remaking them. There is no PR. There is no rebranding. There is no ad campaign. It's all about the content. And now the content can be augmented or harmed by a PR campaign, for sure. They could mess it up. They could get really good content, and then they could blow it by doing a bad. I've seen people do it. It could happen, but it's all about the content. And until we all see Monsters of California, who knows?
Wow. Wow. Let's move on to another topic here, Jon. Gary Nolan, we talked a lot about him last week. And
Yes.
then it was announced today that he is now an official member of the Galileo project put together by Avi Loeb. This comes on the heels of Gary Nolan's work partner and mentor, Jacques Vallée, joining the Galileo project a week or so ago. How important is this for the Galileo project to get someone as credible as Gary Nolan on their team?
I would argue that all that several of the previous members that have been announced have all been for different reasons. I would argue that Jacques Vallée, and to much more of a degree, Dr. Gary Nolan, these are actually really strong players for this team. And I don't mean to say that anyone else is not a strong player. What I mean is that if I was staffing for the team that Avi Loeb is trying to make, these are people like these two are folks that you would actually want involved. You would really want to have involved. I mean, Gary Nolan. I mean, I it's hard for me because I live right near Stanford. Right, I went to Stanford for part of my career, my education. I mean, like I love Stanford. That's where Gary Nolan is. He's an awesome dude, and Gary's doing amazing work.
What can Gary Nolan and his own studies at Stanford bring to the Galileo project compared to, say, other people?
Oh, well, because of the fact that essentially, one is that uh, unlike Vallée, Gary Nolan is actually actively working at a top named university, and so essentially, if any of the work that Nolan does with Galileo results in a paper being produced with Nolan's name on it, that's a big deal for everybody, right? That potentially, if it's a well received paper. Um, yeah, I mean it's uh, the problem is that I still don't have a clear picture exactly what the jurisdiction is of Galileo. If Galileo's jurisdiction remains things in deep space, then I think it's a little harder to find a good place for Gary. I think that if it starts to include anything having to do with experiencers or reports or contact or recovery of debris or recovery of craft, then there's no one better.
Do you think, though, his name lends to more credibility in this field?
That's what's hard for me to say, and that's what I was trying to get to before when I made the comment about my relationship with Stanford. I wasn't trying to brag or anything, but just that it's just it's hard not to be a huge fan of Stanford and so forth. But I mean Gary's I don't really know for sure. I mean the type of work Gary is doing is very hands-on, dedicated, real science. And so I don't really know whether Galileo would end up with any material that he could really apply his skills to. But what I also don't know is my opinion of Dr. Gary Nolan somehow exaggerated because of my physical proximity to Stanford and the fact that I took some classes. Like, I don't know. My point is, I don't know how well known Gary Nolan is. In my mind, he's very well known, and his name would bring a lot of credibility to Galileo. But in the grand scheme of things, I'm wondering if I just have a horrible bias for Stanford. And the truth of the matter is that most people haven't really heard of him. So I don't really know that for sure.
Well, I think he does. And I think more people were going to learn the impact that somebody like Gary Nolan can have. I'm a big fan of Gary Nolan's. I really am. And, the fact that recently we found out that he put $70,000 of his own money into his own research, I mean, and that's all regarding ET contact, the metals, and everything that goes along with it. He's doing a lot of brain studies on people who claim to be experiencers. I
Well,
mean,
remember,
this,
he was the guy in the beginning that did the study on that little Egyptian mummy, right? I mean,
right?
it's like he's been doing good work for a while now.
It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. And you know what? We should all be, you know, really
Yeah,
truly
no,
impressed.
no. I mean, I will go as far as to say is right now looking at this whole field and so forth. My personal opinion is that there is absolutely nobody more important to this entire thing than Dr. Gary Nolan at this point in time.
I would agree with you. I would agree with you on that. And John, any other topics you want to hit before we got
Well,
about two
yeah, the
minutes?
one thing I just wanted to say is that here on Coast to Coast last night, we had two 25-year CIA veterans that both in their talks absolutely confirmed their belief that contact is real, that the phenomenon is real, that we don't know what it is, but that we damn well better figure out what it is. And to have two CIA veterans both state that unequivocally for 10 million people to hear, that's something. That really is something.
It really is. And it shows the magnitude of their message getting out. And hopefully they can find some time for little old us in the near future, because I would love to talk to Jim Semivan,
Oh
and I
yeah,
would
yeah.
love to talk to Gary Nolan. I've talked to him on the phone a couple of times, and it's different when you're actually getting to put questions his way.
Oh yeah. No. Man, Stanford's local to me. I one of these days I'm gonna go over there and try to meet the guy because I admire him so much.
I agree. John, thank you for a very successful Unbiased UFO report. We'll talk to you in a couple of
Thank you.
days.
And Dave, thank you for that beautiful, beautiful, beautiful thing you did. That was a beautiful thing you guys did. That was really, really nice, and that was awesome to listen to.
Thank
So
you,
thank you
buddy.
much. All right,
Butch
thank you,
deserved it.
everybody. Oh,
Butch deserved it.
absolutely.
Absolutely, John. Jon Hudson with the Unbiased UFO Report.